So a recent theme of this channel has been the topic of defense. And while I was considering what videos I should make, I realized that I've never done the top 10 DPOY seasons in NBA history. So that's where this video comes in, starting with number 10. Alonzo Mourning in 1999. He was 28 years old and playing for the Miami Heat, and this guy usually isn't appreciated enough as being one of the greatest rim protectors in the history of the game. For myself personally, I think he should have made it into the top 75 greatest players of all time. And his peak season defensively was in 1999, when he averaged 0.7 steals and a monstrous 3.9 blocks. It was a lockout-shortened season, so I think this year doesn't usually get as much respect as it deserves. But he did play in 46 out of the 50 games that year. He was 4th in defensive win shares, and thanks to his leadership, Miami finished 1st in the Atlantic Division with a 33-17 record. Alonzo got postered plenty of times in his career, but that was because he was the epitome of aggressive on defense, as he challenged everything as the rim protector. And if you ask me, that's the kind of teammate you want on your side down low. Number 9. Alvin Robertson in 1986. This San Antonio Spurs legend was one of the most feisty players to ever play on the perimeter. At this point, he was 27 years old, and he averaged a monstrous 3.7 steals, which is an NBA record to this very day. But that wasn't all that he did. That would be crazy enough in itself, but he also averaged 0.5 blocks, which is actually quite impressive, especially for a 6'4" guard. He had availability as he played in 78 of the 82 regular season games. He was 2nd in defensive plus-minus, and among all players who received DPOY votes, Robertson was the leader in defensive win shares. His Spurs barely made it to the playoffs with a 35-47 record. But that wasn't his fault, as he was an absolute pest on the perimeter, and was one of the sole reasons why they were able to win some games. Number 8. Dwight Howard in 2009. Prime Dwight Howard was an absolute menace. He had a gravitational pull both offensively and defensively that was pivotal for the Orlando Magic's success, and that year they had plenty of it, as they finished the regular season with a 59-23 record. On the year, he averaged 1 steal and 2.9 blocks. He was able to get those blocks because of his quickness and because of his insane athleticism, equipped with tremendous leaping ability. He was also dominant in advanced analytics, as he was 1st overall in defensive rating and 1st overall in defensive win shares. Thanks to Dwight's interior impact, they finished with the number 1 ranked defense in the entire league, and that wouldn't have been anywhere close to possible without him. Number 7. Dikembe Mutombo in 1995. Mount Mutombo was an absolute force, especially as a member of the Denver Nuggets, and this season happened to be his absolute peak of his defensive abilities. On the year, he averaged 0.5 steals and 3.9 blocks per game. He was the defensive anchor of that squad, and he contested absolutely everything. And I'm sure he provided plenty of nightmares to opposing offensive players, as he was always sure to cap off his blocked shots with his iconic finger wag. Dikembe had a ridiculously long wingspan, so even for the ones he didn't get a piece of, he certainly altered its trajectory, and for his impact, I believe he certainly deserves a spot on my list. Number 6. Draymond Green in 2017. Unless you play at the center position, it's certainly hard to crack this top 10. But Draymond Green's performance in their historic 2017 season is certainly worth it in my opinion. The Warriors absolutely dominated that season and finished the year with a 67-15 record. They were also ranked 2nd defensively in the league, and most of that credit belongs to their defensive leader, Draymond Green. On the year, he averaged 2 steals and an impressive 1.4 blocks. He was 2nd in defensive win shares and 2nd overall in defensive rating, while being 1st overall in defensive plus-minus. He did a little bit of everything for that squad defensively, and he also deserves a ton of credit for his defensive IQ and for his verbal leadership on that end. Number 5. David Robinson in 1992. This Spurs team may have only finished with a 47-35 record, But that doesn't change the fact that they had the best defense statistically in the entire league, and we all know who deserves the majority of that credit. On the year, he averaged 2.3 steals and a ridiculous 4.5 blocks. That is the highest combination average of blocks and steals in NBA history. He also had the best defensive plus-minus and by far the best defensive rating in the entire league. I've actually seen some lists that rank David Robinson as high as the #1 spot among the greatest DPOYs of all time. But for myself personally, he only played in 68 of the 82 regular season games, which honestly kept him from being even higher on my list. Because as I've said time and time again, you can only have a defensive impact for the games that you're actually out there, and for 14 games that year, he provided nothing. Number 4. Dennis Rodman in 1991. As usual, Rodman didn't have gaudy stats by any means, but what 91 Rodman did have is arguably the greatest on-ball defense from any player in NBA history. He always played with 100% effort, and he had an endless motor to back it up, as he was simply one of the most athletic players to ever live. He finished 4th overall in defensive rating, and as usual, Rodman was among the league leaders in defensive rebounding. The Detroit Pistons also allowed the fewest points per game of any team that season. And again, we all know where the majority of that credit belongs. Number 3. Mark Eaton in 1985. This 7'4" monster was 28 years old at this point, and although he was usually among the greatest defensive players in the game, this season specifically was especially special. He played all 82 games that year, and on the year, he averaged 0.4 steals and an NBA record 5.6 blocks. That was more than double the second place runner-up, which just happened to be one of the other greatest rim protectors of all time, Hakeem Olajuwon. Despite having only a 41-41 record, Utah still had the best defense in the entire league statistically, and that was thanks to the incredible impact of their center down low. Mark was first in defensive rating, and he was also first in defensive plus-minus. Along with that, he was first overall in defensive win shares. Simply put, he's one of the most underrated and underappreciated rim protectors of all time. And without question, his 1985 campaign was utterly ridiculous. Number 2. Ben Wallace in 2003. He was in his late 20s, and he was making his ascension defensively right as the Detroit Pistons were becoming one of the greatest defensive teams of all time. They were led by Wallace, who was one of the strongest and most intimidating centers of all time. On the year, he averaged 1.4 steals and 3.2 blocks, while commanding tons of respect down low. He also averaged a remarkable 11.4 defensive rebounds per game, which was first in the league overall. He was also first in defensive win shares, first in defensive plus-minus, and first overall in defensive rating. Whether it was the eye test, the basic stats, or the advanced stats, Wallace simply dominated that season to a historic extent. With a 50-32 record, the Pistons finished with the best record in the Eastern Conference, as they were allowing the fewest points per game that season. I debated whether or not this should go in the first or second spot, but this is what I settled on after splitting some hairs. Here is my list of honorable mentions. Should any of these players have made the top 10 instead? Number 1. Hakeem Olajuwon in 1993. Hakeem isn't just one of the greatest defensive players and one of the greatest rim protectors of all time, but he's in the argument for being the greatest defensive player of all time. And for what he did in 1993, he's certainly worthy of a top 2 spot in my mind. At the time, he was 30 years old, and he was one of the greatest pickpockets in the entire league, not just at the center position, as he averaged a whopping 1.8 steals, to go along with his tremendous 4.2 blocks. He also accumulated the second most defensive rebounds that season. What is now unheard of by modern NBA standards, he played all 82 games in that regular season. His Rockets finished with a 55-27 record, He was second in defensive rating and second overall in defensive win shares. If you ask me, he's also one of the most versatile defensive players of all time, as he had the speed and lateral quickness to keep up with even some of the perimeter players who challenged him. He had every kind of block shot in his arsenal, whether it was as the main defender, the help defender, or with chase down blocks. Some may argue otherwise, but for myself personally, I think the Dream is deserving of the number 1 spot. So what do you guys think? Who is a player that didn't make the list that should have? And how would your list differ from mine? I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comment section below. Thanks for watching as always, make sure to like and subscribe for more basketball content, and I'll see you guys in the next video.